Let me tell you about a man I'll call Walter. Walter was 74 years old when I met him, retired railroad engineer. Big hands, quiet voice, the kind of man who measured his words like he measured steel twice before he cut anything. He'd buried a wife, raised two kids who rarely called, and spent his evenings on a porch in Ohio watching the same sunset he'd watched for 40 years. One evening, Walter said something to me I have never forgotten. He said, I spent 60 years being careful, and when I got old, I realized careful and cowardly wear the same coat. I didn't understand him at first, so I asked him what he meant. He told me about a woman he'd loved at 22. A trip to California he never took because it wasn't practical. A brother he stopped speaking to over an argument, so small he couldn't even remember what it was about anymore. Only that neither of them had been willing to make the first call. Walter wasn't a bad man. He wasn't lazy or cruel or foolish. He was careful, and careful, he told me, had cost him more than any risk ever could have. That conversation is the reason I'm sitting here talking to you tonight. Because Walter isn't one man. Walter is almost everyone I have ever sat with in the final chapters of their life. The details change. The shape of the regret does not. So tonight, I'm not going to lecture you. I'm going to hand you the map that people like Walter drew with their own hands at the very end, so that you don't have to draw it the hard way. Here is the first truth, and it surprises almost everyone. When people reach the last years of their life, they very rarely regret the things they tried and failed at. They regret the things they never said out loud, not the business that failed, the apology that was never given, not the marriage that ended. The years spent married to silence inside that marriage. Years of biting your tongue instead of speaking your truth, not the risk that didn't pay off. The love that was never spoken, out of fear it wouldn't be spoken back. Think about your own life for a moment. Think of the boldest thing you ever did, the job you quit, the move you made, the person you married against everyone's advice. Even if it went badly, I would bet you don't regret having tried. What you regret are the moments you stayed quiet. The moments you shrunk yourself to keep the peace. Silence feels safe. It is the most convincing lie you will ever tell yourself. Because unlike a risk, silence doesn't fail loudly. It fails quietly over decades until one day you are 70 years old on a porch, wondering why the people closest to you never really knew you. So here is the first shift I want you to make, starting tonight. The next time you feel the urge to stay quiet, to keep things smooth, pause. Ask yourself, am I protecting the relationship or am I protecting myself from a hard 5 minutes? Because if it's the second one, you already know what to do. I want to tell you about a woman named Dorothy. Dorothy was 81, former school teacher, sharp as a tack, the kind of woman who still did the crossword in pen. She told me once that the biggest lie of her 40s and 50s was a single phrase she repeated to herself almost daily. There will be time. There will be time to visit her sister. There will be time to write the letter. There will be time to make the trip to see the ocean she talked about since she was a girl. There will be time to tell her son she was proud of him. Instead of only correcting his mistakes, Dorothy's sister died at 68. Before that visit ever happened, she told me, and I want you to really hear this, I didn't lose her suddenly. I lost her slowly, one next year at a time. Here's the truth beneath the truth. The clock does not know your excuses. It does not care that you're busy, that the timing isn't right, that you'll get to it after the holidays, after retirement, after the kids are settled. The clock simply moves, and every next year you promise yourself is a bet against a deadline you cannot see. So I want you to do something uncomfortable right now. I want you to think of one person you've been meaning to call, not someday, not eventually, and I want you to make a decision right now in your mind about when that call happens, not soon, a day, this week, because there will be time is not a plan. It is the softest, most comfortable form of avoidance ever invented, and it is the single most common regret I have heard in 30 years of listening to people at the end of their road. Let me tell you about Frank. Frank spent 40 years in a career he never wanted because at 23 it was the responsible choice, and admitting he wanted something different felt, in his words, like admitting I'd wasted my youth already. So he kept the mask on. For 4 decades, by the time Frank was 65, he wasn't bitter about the career itself. Plenty of people build good lives in careers they didn't choose. What haunted Frank was something else entirely. He realized he had spent so many years performing a version of himself for other people's approval. that he had genuinely lost track of who he actually was underneath it. He told me, I know exactly what my coworkers thought of me. I have no idea what I actually think of me. That is one of the loneliest sentences a human being can say. Here's what I want you to understand. It is never too late to stop performing. Not at 50, not at 70, not at 90. The mask you've worn for other people's comfort can come off the moment you decide it comes off. The only cost is other people's temporary confusion, and I promise you that cost is far smaller than the cost of another decade spent as a stranger to yourself. Ask yourself tonight quietly, honestly, where in my life am I still performing instead of living? You already know the answer. You knew it before I finished the sentence. This next one is the hardest truth I have ever had to deliver, because I know some of you watching this are carrying a wound that feels unforgivable. A parent who failed you, a partner who betrayed you, a friend who vanished when you needed them most. I am not going to tell you that what happened to you was okay. It wasn't. But I need to tell you what I watched happen to a man named Samuel. Samuel carried anger at his father for 53 years. 53 years of a grudge so old it had become part of his identity. He introduced himself almost proudly as the son who never forgave his old man. His father had died when Samuel was 40. The grudge outlived the man by over a decade. In his final year, Samuel told me something that broke my heart. I built a prison to keep him out, and then I realized I was the only one still living in it. His father was gone. He couldn't be hurt by Samuel's anger anymore. Samuel was the only one still paying the daily price for a debt that could no longer even be collected. Forgiveness is not a gift you give to the person who wronged you. It is the key you use to release yourself. You can forgive someone and never speak to them again. You can forgive someone who is no longer alive. You can forgive someone who never apologized, never will, and never even knows they need to be forgiven. Because forgiveness was never about their comfort. It was always only about setting down a weight that was breaking your back 1 year at a time. If there is a name in your mind right now, and I think there is, I am not asking you to forget what they did. I am asking you to consider that you have carried this stone long enough, and it was never their arm getting tired. It was yours. I want you to think about the word busy for a moment. We wear it like an achievement. I'm so busy, we say it almost with pride. But I sat with a man named Gerald, a former executive, the kind of man whose calendar had been full for 40 straight years, and near the end of his life he said something that stopped me cold. I used busy to avoid every hard conversation I ever needed to have. With my wife, with my son, with myself. Busy wasn't my life. Busy was my alibi. Think about that phrase, busy was his alibi. An alibi is what you use to prove you weren't present when something happened. Gerald used his career, his responsibilities, his endless obligations as proof that he simply couldn't have been present for the conversations that mattered. Even though, in truth, he was choosing not to be busy feels productive. It feels virtuous. But sometimes, and I want you to really sit with this, busy is simply the most respectable costume that avoidance ever wears. I want you to ask yourself, is there a conversation, a relationship, a piece of unfinished business in your life that you have been avoiding by staying busy? Not lazy, not incapable. Busy if the honest answer is yes, that busyness has an expiration date, and you are the only one who can set it. Let me tell you about Eleanor. Eleanor spent decades believing she needed to have everything figured out before she could truly show up for her children and grandchildren. She wanted to be the grandmother with the perfect house, the perfect advice, the perfect composure. Never the one who cried in front of them. Never the one who admitted she was scared or lost or unsure. At 79, lying in a hospital bed, she told her granddaughter something for the first time in her life. That she had been terrified of dying alone. That she had made mistakes with Eleanor's own mother she never fully repaired. That she didn't have it all figured out and never had. Her granddaughter didn't pull away. She held Eleanor's hand tighter than she ever had before. Eleanor told me afterward. Through tears, 60 years I gave her my performance. 10 minutes I gave her my truth. And the 10 minutes is what she'll remember. This is one of the great myths of growing older, that our job is to be the finished, polished, wise elder who has it all sorted out. But the people who love you do not need your perfection. They are not looking for a statue. They are looking for you, uncertain, imperfect, still figuring it out even at 80, because your realness gives them permission to be real too. Stop performing wisdom you don't feel. Show up as you actually are. That is the inheritance that actually lasts. I need to speak plainly here, because this truth doesn't get said enough. Regret does not just live in your mind. It lives in your shoulders, your chest, your stomach, your sleep. I have watched people carry decades-old resentments and unspoken grief manifest as tension headaches, as insomnia, as a tightness in the chest that no doctor could quite explain. A man named Harold, a proud, stoic man, the I don't talk about feelings type, spent years dismissing his chronic tension as simply getting older. It was only in his last years, after finally speaking openly for the first time about the son he'd lost touch with, that he told me his shoulders felt lighter than they had in a decade. Not because his circumstances had changed overnight, but because he'd stopped using his body as a warehouse for words he refused to say. I am not a doctor, and I won't pretend unspoken pain is the only cause of physical tension. But I have seen this pattern too many times to ignore it. The body often keeps the receipts for debts the mind refuses to acknowledge. If you are carrying tension, restlessness, a weight in your chest that has no obvious source, ask yourself honestly whether there is something unspoken sitting underneath it. Sometimes the most healing thing you can do at 50, 60, 70 years old is simply to finally say the sentence you've swallowed for 20 years. Now here is the truth I promised you at the very beginning. The reason I do this work at all, every single regret I have described to you tonight. Walter's silence, Dorothy's There Will Be Time, Frank's mask, Samuel's grudge, Gerald's busyness, Eleanor's performance, Harold's swallowed grief, every single one of them had an expiration date that the person didn't see coming, but you are not at the expiration date. Not yet. You are watching this video, which means you still have days left, and days, my friend, are the only currency that has ever mattered. The regrets I've shared with you were spoken by people at the very end of the road, looking backward. I am asking you to do something far more powerful, to look backward now while you still have road left ahead of you, and let their hindsight become your foresight. This is the whole reason these stories matter. Not so you can feel sad about people you'll never meet, but so you can walk into tomorrow morning and make one different choice. Call the person, say the true thing, put down the grudge, take off the mask, while it still costs you nothing but courage. Instead of everything, the only truly unfixable regret is the still sitting in front of you, unaddressed, while you had the chance to fix it and chose to wait one more day. So let's go back to that room I mentioned at the beginning, the one you never really leave. Here is what I want you to understand. That room does not have to be a prison, it can be a doorway. Walter's room was silence, and his doorway was one honest conversation with his brother, which he did eventually have 3 months before his brother passed, and which he told me changed the way he remembered his entire life. Dorothy's room was There Will Be Time, and though she couldn't get her sister back, she used what she learned to finally take her son to see the ocean at 81 years old, and she called it the best week of her final decade. Your room might be different from theirs, but I promise you it has a door, and the door isn't locked. It was never locked. It only ever needed you to reach for the handle. So here is what I want you to do starting tonight, not someday. Make the call you've been postponing. Say the true thing you've been swallowing. Put down the stone you've been carrying for someone who may not even remember picking it up. Stop performing the version of yourself you think people want. And let them meet the one who's actually been in there the whole time. You cannot undo the years behind you. Nobody can. Not Walter, not Dorothy, not Frank, not Samuel, not Eleanor, not Harold, and not you. But you can absolutely change what the years ahead of you will look like when you finally reach that porch, that final quiet evening, and look back on how you lived. Let today be the day you stop being careful and start being honest. Let today be the day the room becomes a door. If this reached you tonight, tell me in the comments which of these 8 truths hit closest to home. I read every single one. And so does this community. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, a friend, a parent, a sibling who's been carrying something too long, send them this video tonight, not tomorrow. Because as we just spent the last 20 minutes learning together, tomorrow is a promise none of us actually get to keep. Thank you for spending this time with me. I'll see you in the next one.